One. Hello there, and welcome to another edition of Falmouth Cares Business Roundtable. I'm your host, Troy Clarkson, and as always, we have our panel of local experts. Our tech expert, Gary Vacon, president of the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce, Michael Kasperian, and everyone's favorite restaurateur, Bill Zammer. This week, we're very pleased to be joined by two other local experts who will share their experiences with us. We're very pleased to have with us Attorney Jeff Oppenheim and Elizabeth Corey, the owner of Summerfield Spa. But before we get to our guests, as always, I'll ask Gary to share with us some statistics and trending on how things have developed since last week's show. But first, I most certainly would like to take a moment and pause and recognize the solemn and unfortunate milestone of 100,000 deaths in our country. And also right now, our country, in addition to the 100,000 deaths, is grieving another tragic loss. So we extend not only our sympathies to the family of George Floyd, but to the millions of Americans who are trying to understand and process and figure out how to move forward. So let's just take a moment in recognition of those two unfortunate events in our country. Thank you all very much. And Gary, I know that 100,000 soul milestone, we present those numbers as numbers every week, but those are 100,000 families who've lost a cherished loved one. And part of the reason why we do the show every week is to continue to underscore the importance of the work that we've all done in terms of keeping ourselves and our loved ones safe. So with that, I'll ask you to provide your usual in-depth and very, very helpful update.
Okay, thanks, Troy. I'll start with this. As Troy mentioned, it's 100,000. It's over 100,000 people now that have passed away from coronavirus in only a 2.5-month period. It's significant. These are real people. I know week to week I talk about numbers like we're measuring something, but we're not just measuring something. We're measuring people's lives. So I just want to acknowledge that and join the families that are grieving for the people that they've lost. Okay, so moving on to the data and the latest update. This is the data as of March 31st from the usual sources. Again, I always emphasize this, the level of testing we're doing is greater than it's been, but it's still, we've only tested in total 5.18% of the US population. We're testing 0.13% of the US population a day. In Massachusetts, 8.59, we've done better, but we're still only testing about 0.15% of the Massachusetts population a day. It's a plan to get to very much higher testing in Massachusetts, which is good news. But again, statistical inferences from this data are difficult because it's a small amount of data and it's not random data. We're still sampling people based on a priority basis. I put this up week to week, which is the growth factor, the compounding rate, which is going down quite a bit. In Massachusetts, we're only growing cases at 0.7% per day. This is usually lower than when we started way back here, and we're growing at 20-30% rate. The blue line is the United States, and the kind of orangey line is Massachusetts. Here's a graph that I've been keeping week to week, which is the Massachusetts daily new case rate. And we've crept well under 1,000 cases a day now, which is good. And this is the number of tests we're doing per day. So you have to, as I've always pointed out, that you have to be careful. If there's a dip here and there's a dip here, you can't draw as much conclusion, but you can kind of average this out. And we are going downhill, and we're going downhill at a good rate, which is good news. We talk every week about the University of Washington model, which was the Gates Foundation funded model, which is trying to do a projection. It's interesting now, their projections as they move forward, they're trying to reflect the increased or decreased social distancing that's occurring across the country. And you see, New York still has the darkest color here, which is the most social distancing. As we've started to open up a little bit more than New York, we have less. And you can see kind of the lighter colors are the lesser amount of social distancing, and they've tried to build that into their model. In Massachusetts, the daily infection rate, this line down here is what we're measuring. This line up here is what the model assumes that the actual infection rate is. They're figuring it's about 5 times what we actually measure. But it's going downhill, and you can see the rate at which it's going downhill, even in their projections. And this is the daily death rate in Massachusetts, and that's the uncertainty. And again, these were from the model, which was the predictive model. So we always, weekly, we compare that with what's actually going on in Massachusetts. This is the actual death rate in Massachusetts, which looks very similar to that curve, and kind of makes you feel like the model might be working. Also, this is declining at a very nice rate. And this is the cumulative hospitalizations in Massachusetts. It is kind of interesting. After watching this for a few weeks, I guess discharges occur on the weekends. It kind of makes sense. But still, the level of net discharges were down below 2,000, and we're as high as almost 4,000 people in the hospital in Massachusetts with COVID. Then I want to talk a little bit more about the mass reopening plan. We're now 2 weeks into phase 1. Phase 1 is a minimum of 3 weeks long. We talked about this last week. Why is 3 weeks a good idea? It's because, again, the action that we take here is reflected in results 2 or 3 weeks later, because you have to count the time it takes for the infection to manifest itself. You know, feel symptoms, contact a doctor, get a test, get test results, and start to get to the things that we can count. So I think it's, this was a good idea, waiting 3 weeks minimum between phases. And for instance, we're going to learn about how behaviors on the 18th affected us probably this week. You kind of have to think about what's going on now as something that's going to show up in the numbers 2 or 3 weeks from now. The mass public health indicators are all going downhill nicely, including the weighted average positive test rate, which is, they're averaging 7 days just to take out the bumpiness, the number of patients in the hospital, how much we're using surge capacity, and the death rate. So these things are all good. Governor Baker should be happy with this, at least so far. He's got a week to go to decide whether to go to phase 2. And, our opening plan, as I think people are aware, is retail and restaurants and lodging with some restrictions, hope to open on phase 2. Now, there was some more detail that came up about retail and lodging over the last week. The first thing was, and I know Bill's very aware of this, and we'll probably want to talk about this in more detail, but the initial part of phase 2, when restaurants are allowed to do more than curbside service, is to have the ability to do outdoor table service, but not indoor table service. That would be a second kind of sub-phase 2 release of activity. And there's more detail under this, but I want to make sure that was out there. And the same thing, there's some rules around lodging that are starting to come out. And I don't know exactly how this is going to work, but still the idea in lodging was, 14 days after arriving in Massachusetts, people are supposed to sequester themselves, and how that exactly works in the tourist industry. It's kind of an interesting question. But anyway, that's what I have for now. I'm going to stop the share so we can discuss.
Well, thank you very much, Gary. And it will certainly be interesting to see, based on that 3-week latency period, how the new diagnoses or the new positive tests change in the coming weeks because of the fact that we now have a phased and relaxed reopening. And as we've all seen, I think some people continue to take those precautions very seriously, and some less so. My wife and I were at the beach yesterday, and I have to say, we were at Megansett Beach in North Falmouth for a few hours, and everyone that was there was being very respectful of others. They were gathering in small groups of families, but making sure they were spaced at appropriate distances, but go other places and not so much. I think in our region, people appear to be more vigilant than what we see in other parts of the country. So it really is a stay tuned kind of thing right now, where we'll see in 3 or 4 weeks what, if any, impact the phased reopening has had.
Troy, I'm hearing from a lot of my friends up in the suburbs of Boston. The kids are back from college, and they're going to their friends' houses and coming home. And I'm saying to my friends, wait, what are you doing? And they're just, it's open season. They let her rip. So I'm not sure they're all following the rules and regs. Gary, I got a question. I tried to find some numbers from Barnstable, and there are 240,000 people who live here year-round, roughly. Do we know, was it 100 deaths we've had in Barnstable so
God,
far?
I can do that data in a minute. I can dig for that as we talk, but I can't. I think you're on the right order of magnitude, if I recall.
I guess the question is, our numbers are going to be so screwed up with what happened, like people coming here and now staying here. I mean, I wonder how they're measuring, my New York neighbor, if he gets sick or she gets sick here, is that counted against Cape Cod or back where they were in New York? It really skews our numbers, I think.
I know. Our numbers actually have been quite modest, I mean, so far, but that's really an interesting question. I just wanted to comment to Troy's comment and yours that I've seen both sides of both compliance and non. I'll give you two examples. One example is a friend of mine had one of their children come back from college, and they did not have that kid come back to their house until he'd been sequestered someplace else for a week and had a negative test. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, when I go out for my morning run, I'm running across the street to avoid people without face masks, and I'm running with a face mask that I flip up. So I don't know. I see both ends of the spectrum in terms of behavior, and I think we're about to measure how that behavior causes an impact in 2 or 3 weeks.
But the word of caution, Gary, is this is not over. People are relaxing everything and thinking it's done when we know, as you look at your charts, it's continuing. It's going to continue.
Yeah, and we have not seen any data that, any data that we've seen on, kind of herd immunity, it's still rather modest, right? I mean, even in New York City, the numbers that we've seen over the last few weeks have been, 20% maybe of the population of New York City, maybe 30%, and even as much as 40% in some neighborhoods have, some level of immunity. So the level of exposure of society to this, in assuming immunity works, and there's been discussion about how much that works, is relatively modest. So if the thing is still active, there's a lot of us that are still capable of getting it. I don't know. I'm still behaving, to be honest with you, I'll be honest about myself. I'm behaving about a phase behind the governor in terms of my personal behavior.
I am as well. Troy, where do you want to go to next?
So, and I think that makes sense, that level of caution, because we just don't know, right? And until we see what the impacts of the phased opening are on the number of cases, it's important to maintain that vigilance. So, Jeff Oppenheim, you have been practicing law here in Falmouth for a very long time, and you've seen trends and issues come and go over the years, but none like this. And so we're grateful that you're bringing your experience, not just as an attorney, but as an active citizen and someone who cares deeply about our community. And it's really that perspective that we're most grateful that you're bringing to the table today. So, Jeff, just talk to us a little bit about what you've seen, certainly in your practice as an attorney, but also in your volunteer work and in your role just as a trusted citizen here in Falmouth, as this has unfolded over the last couple of months.
So, thank you, Troy, for having me participate. I've seen a lot of anxiety amongst my clients. I've had a couple of real estate transactions fall apart with sizable deposits at risk. And I represent a number of restaurants, and I'm probably most concerned about that area of small business surviving. And I think, our community has to be extremely responsive to that segment of the business community. I think on the nonprofit side, we represent a number of nonprofits, and my partner and I also have been either on the boards of various nonprofits or in an advisory capacity. I think that we're going to see the impact on that sector of our community probably in the months ahead, because it's the business community that is very supportive in Falmouth of things like the Falmouth Service Center, which I was chairman of that board for 2 years. But the Service Center has also enjoyed such deep support that I think thus far they've been able to continue to raise funds, even though their thrift shop has been closed because of the pandemic. And they're managing to do workarounds by not having people come into the pantry, but by passing food out, through bags, etc. But my partner has been very involved in the Falmouth Road Race, and that's been an important fundraiser in our community. Right now, they're finishing installing a brand new track at the high school at tremendous expense. They're going to run a virtual race this summer. It will be interesting to see how that works out, and how much of the funds they can raise. So kind of the verdict is still out on a lot of the impacts, for sure, especially in the nonprofit sector. I don't do litigation, but I would anticipate that we're going to have lots of COVID-19 based litigation between landlords and tenants, between suppliers and recipients of supplies. And it will be interesting to me to see how the courts, how lenient they are in the interpretation of contracts, because so many contracts that we've drafted over the last, decades have no pandemic provision in them. They now have pandemic provisions in them. Every purchase and sales agreement now has a pandemic provision in it. There will be changes in the language. There'll be changes in how our judicial system works. It's right now really working primarily in a virtual way, with only emergent cases going, before judges in the Commonwealth. We're not likely to have jury trials until probably earliest in September, although that's not really clear yet either. So our judicial system is functioning, but at a completely different level. I think one of the things that may come from this is that instead of litigants having to appear in court for everything, that maybe Zoom is going to be the new standard for a lot of this stuff. And that's not going to be all bad. As someone who, as a young attorney, has sat in courtrooms and waited sometimes for hours to be heard by a judge for 5 or 10 minutes. So you blow a half a day. You have to charge the client because you're not able to do anything else but sit there. And, you've literally spent 10 minutes or a half an hour actually practicing law. So there could be some positive things that emerge as a result of this. But right now, there's probably more questions than answers as an attorney. I'm practicing law in my driveway here in my office. I go out to see my clients to execute documents. There's a lot of estate planning going on because there's a lot of, fear of what happens if I get sick. So we're trying to, do as much as we can, as quickly as we can to help our clients and our small businesses, because that's basically what we have. We don't have any large businesses in our community other than, let's say, the nonprofits of Falmouth Hospital and the Oceanographic Institute.
Flying Bridge Restaurant.
Excuse me?
The Flying Bridge nonprofits,
Yeah. So I don't know if that gives some perspective, Troy. I mean, it's probably a lot I could say. we just as an example only, we were representing a seller of a home here in East Falmouth, and the buyer insisted that our seller vacate the property 2 weeks before the closing.
Wow.
That's like, I mean, to me, it's unprecedented, because they wanted to be sure that when they moved in, that, whatever germs could have been there were no longer there. This was early on. I haven't seen that since. But, it gives you some idea of the level of anxiety.
Jeff, I have a number of questions. I guess they're more words of caution. As an employer, I can envision some OSHA violations, or someone claiming an OSHA violation in that my workplace was not safe because they contracted COVID-19, because I've quote unquote forced them to come to work, which actually I do, because once I call them off into work and they go off unemployment, they do have to come to work. So
Yes.
I force them to come to work and they get sick, they're going to blame me. I mean, Congress has not legislated any kind of limited liability or any kind of relief from this. So what do you see happening there? How's that work out?
Jeff, before you answer that, let me just, for our viewers who aren't familiar, the OSHA, of which Bill speaks, is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. That's all right. And they regulate workplace health and safety throughout the United States. I just wanted to clarify that.
So I'm going to put a caveat on this. I don't consider myself an employment law attorney, but I think that as an employer, following whatever the guidelines are of the state and of the local boards of health are going to be really critical. And to be able to show that you have been following those standards would be the protective measure that I would say to any client of mine who employs others. We, in our setting here in the law office, a lot of attorneys are working from home, and we gave our staff the option of working from home. They have elected not to work from home, so they come in, but at any point, if they feel uncomfortable, they are free to leave. So far, it's worked out. We've protected them from outside, by not allowing anyone into the building. So I think, each industry has to find their own workarounds and how to feel compliant. All of this falls apart if one of us gets sick. So fortunately, that has not happened. Everyone has maintained their health. But I think, perhaps there's going to be an insurance that might be available to employers. You would think that might be a product that insurance companies might want to consider. I think the premiums would be really high, Bill, especially for you. You have a lot of people on your payroll. But I think it's usually in a negligence setting. It's usually a reasonable person standard that the defendant would be held to in a case of negligence. OSHA has guidelines. If you're following their guidelines, I think all of that is very protective of the employer. How are they going to be able to prove, frankly, that they were exposed at the workplace to the virus? I mean, that may be a very difficult proof for a injured worker.
Well, it goes beyond that then too, Jeff. And the next phase is, as a customer, the rules we got to follow are quite arduous. In that it's insanity. They're going to wear the face mask. They're going to wear the gloves and all these kinds of things. I can envision again lawsuits coming from customers who claim they got sick there, and we're in a litigious society. so it scares me in that respect as well. Again, I guess you're saying to follow the guidelines and the best you can.
Well,
Yeah,
sure,
I mean,
because, right, getting sued and getting a judgment are two very different things. So I think, like to Jeff's point, we won't know. I mean, so,
But Michael,
again, follow the rules and hope for the best, right?
it ain't that easy. Following the rules is easy, but it's the cost of the lawsuit that's the problem. I mean, I don't know. It scares the heck out of me.
But Bill, I think that's an excellent question that really many employers and service providers are facing. That's a good transition, Elizabeth, just to ask you to say hello and really talk about the challenges that you've faced, because your business as a spa falls sort of between phase 1 and phase 2, because you obviously offer hair services, but the day spa component is waiting for phase 2. And I know that you have challenges of the issues that Bill and Jeff just spoke of, for not only for your employees, but for your clients. So talk to us a little bit about how this transition and phased opening has been for you.
So it has been very difficult in the sense that as we were starting to get the release, we didn't know the regulations at first. So I would do, as the spa works anyway, we're very structured in sterilization and sanitation. That's just the way that we work. But now it became a little bit more, as I said, very regulated. So I have it posted throughout the whole entire spa so that everybody, if there were clients who wondered, did we have a checklist? There's an absolute checklist when it comes to gloves and masks for the client as well as for those who work there. I am probably one of those who's a little bit more, I don't like to say neurotic, but extremely cautious. My brother did have COVID, so I do know that aspect of it and the touch of it. He ended up having to have surgery done, and I'm his primary care. So I'm the one who takes care of him, and I wasn't able to be there for him. So the fear of having a client walk in the door, or one of my employees, and whether it's a light case or an extreme case, I take that truly to heart. It's my responsibility. So I think for us, what I did was, as the information came forward, I was very much in touch with our clients. And education to me has been my mainstay. That's why I watch you gentlemen every week, because I think all that bit of information, it's every little piece I make notes of, just a different thought process. And I think it's critical. I think as an owner, we have to stand strong and guide those with boundaries as to what's expected. One of the primary things is we check all of our clients before they come in. So they knew prior to them coming in. There's a questionnaire. We've already asked them the questions the day before, like a medical office. I take a temperature. And it's literally, as I say to the girls, you have to do it outside of the building, because once they walk in, they don't always tell the truth. And because it's like, have you been traveling? We have this time of year, we have a lot of clients coming from different states. And if they haven't quarantined for 14 days, they're not allowed to come in. And those are the types of guidelines that have been put out there for us, so that I can follow, as we talk about, follow the regulations, do what's best for my clients. And I will say we did a soft opening last week. A little heart-wrenching. I lost a couple of nights sleep and things like that. But I think the best part was that as clients came in, they felt very comfortable, because they knew, also my client base is in that critical care, in the sense anybody over 60 is one of those that we need to consider as with circumstances, a little bit more extreme cases of getting the COVID. And so for us, that was one more thing that we just needed to take really to heart. As I say, our clients become our family members, and for each and every one of them, it's very critical. So every step that they requested and required is necessary from the time somebody walks in the door. The doors are not open. We don't have that free experience. And for us, what's really difficult is it's a totally different way of doing business. We are an experienced business in the sense when clients come in, they really have that personal touch and personal care, specialized care. And a lot of that has become the absolute value, because we've had to strip a lot of that away. But I think right now it's the only way that we can function. And as long as clients feel safe, that has a value for them and it has a value for us. So it's still different as we move forward. I was on with friends of mine who are in the industry pretty much all over the world. I've got a friend in Germany as well telling me some of the guidelines that they've followed just as to what we can expect as we move forward. And as Mr. Zammer was saying, we just keeping everything to work for everybody is extremely expensive. We were very limited to be able to even get the supplies. So I have medical connections because we are a clinical-based facility. And I was only allowed to order like 1 box of gloves at a time because it needed to be required. The PPE are now a little bit more available. So that also was one of the, for us, a consideration that if I was going to follow the rules, I needed to have supplies. And how much did that mean? And we are changing in between each person and stripping and making sure that things are clean. And I think that's our responsibility. And moving forward, we will not stop. And as everyone was talking about it earlier, it's like I am probably prior to phase 1 because I'm extra cautious. A lot of it because of the client base and where they're coming from and age group and my responsibility to really keep everyone safe.
How are you capturing the cost of all that with your clients?
So that has been a challenge because clients are very fearful of them having to be charged extra for the, some, we'll call it the COVID cost. So right now, I have not added any additional charges. I know. It's definitely something that we need to, the consideration is very difficult because a lot of the supplies were things that I already had in stock. As we move forward, it will definitely have to be an issue. One of the other problems that we have is a lot of people that are coming from different states have never experienced anything like this is what we're going through in Massachusetts. So clients are saying to me, well, we never had to do that. And so when you talk about wearing a mask and me having to check your temperature and quarantining, I mean, we sent out a questionnaire so that way there, prior to us even preparing to open up, how many clients were we actually going to have? There was a large percentage of our client base that actually chose to not come in because they wanted to wait. They wanted to see how everything started to work first and not be the first ones in, which I was grateful for that honesty because you also get a sense of where everyone's thought process is, still being extra cautious and things like that. So we'll evaluate it. I had a chance, we only did a little opening at the very beginning. And we will see as this week progresses because for the aesthetic end of it, as we go to phase 2, there will need to be an additional charge because the cost is extreme. I mean, I have to have 3 rooms ready for 1 person in order to clean things. So it's the ventilation, and if it's an older building, you can't, I mean, yeah, it's the list of the guidelines and the regulations right now are honestly to the point where I'm not sure if I have to wait additional weeks before it's available for us.
So really, thank you, Elizabeth, for that very comprehensive look at the challenges you've faced. And you, like many small business people, including many that we've had on the show over the last couple of months, you're asked most certainly to be doing more so that you can earn less. And that's a real challenge. And so we'll continue to talk about that. And Michael, I know in your extensive contacts with the hundreds of members of the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce, that's a common theme and concern that you're dealing with and really trying to piece together a puzzle that'll make it work as best as it can as the summer season kicks off here in Falmouth.
Super challenging, so there are folks that are in Elizabeth's, position where, as she said, she's readying 3 rooms for 1 room to be used. As Jeff pointed out, the restaurants, I mean, they're in dire condition. When we first got the advice from the governor, we were elated where it said tables have to be 6 feet apart and blah, blah, blah. And we thought, okay, at least that's a start, a viable start. And then you come and find out through the press conference that, it's going to be outdoor seating only. That was like a punch in the gut. And again, I said from the beginning that we've been filming this. we understand we have to be responsible. We have to understand it has to be safe, but there's got to be that balance because the businesses have to survive, Jeff's point. But also, the retail businesses, as we said last week, some of them have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of merchandise that they can't move. And you think about the clothiers who have spring clothes. Like, guess what? It's time for summer clothes. So everybody is super challenged. And, I think Elizabeth brings up a really good point that at some point in this, she's going to have to start charging more. And everyone's going to probably have to start charging more because it's that whole COVID surcharge. And what's that going to do for business? As other people who've been either unemployed or underemployed, I hear a lot of stories about people who are still employed, but they've had to take pay cuts because, it's just they either didn't get the PPP or business is off. They don't have the revenue. So it really is such a challenge all the way around. Our hope is that we can get up and running as soon as practical.
It's so there it is in a nutshell, the daunting challenge for business owners and business patrons, and really trying to strike that balance between safety and maintaining a business and the risk of the unknown, which is really I think the overarching cloud that's over all of us, trying to figure all that out. Jeff, as you've looked at the issues with your clients over the last couple of months, I'm sure that's probably the most prominent factor in everything you do is really the unknown.
Yeah, and trying to find common ground with, between landlord and tenant, for example, tremendous balancing act there, between someone who has been a good tenant, but all of a sudden has no income. And, I have one client up in Boston on Charles Street, and, the rents were really high there to begin with. And, the retail store has been closed. And that's coming off of the winter season, which is not a great season for this particular business. So it's kind of a double whammy. And, the landlords have their obligations. So it's a trickle up effect, sort of. If the tenant can't pay, the landlord might not be able to pay all their obligations, and it throws the whole system and economy into flux. Again, I think each solution is very fact based. It depends on exactly what type of industry you're in and what the challenges are that you're facing. You heard the challenges that Elizabeth is facing. The restaurant industry has their own set, retail, their own set. What are the retail stores going to do with, people coming in and trying stuff on, or even just touching it? How do you deal with that? But overall, Troy, I must say that overall, I have a feeling of confidence that we're going to find solutions and workarounds to these challenges, because there's a lot of bright people who are involved and are trying to work things out. Government may need to be sort of brought along on some of these solutions, instigated by business folk in the community, because our government's never really faced anything like this locally.
Jeff, I know you do a lot of mediation. I think you're a mediator in town. If the courts are backed up and you got a landlord and a tenant, the guy can't pay his rent, and now the landlord wants to do something, the landlord can't do anything because he can't get into the court system. So what happens? I mean, it's a trickle down dilemma all around.
There's no residential there's no residential foreclosures or evictions going on, during
Yeah,
the
but business-wise.
Yeah, business-wise, there's no evictions also being allowed
Oh.
for small businesses. But so, you know, we haven't gotten calls for mediation, Bill. I think maybe because people are trying to work it out on their own. I mean, the landlords understand on some level, most of them, that their tenants can't be paying the full freight. Some of them are reducing the rent and not requiring, you know, it to be repaid in the future. Other landlords are saying, well, I'll tack it on, you know, 6 months from now or at the end of the lease or whatever the case may be. It really depends, I think, on who the landlord is, for instance. But you know, a lot of these small businesses, as you well know, they're cash poor. I mean, especially coming out of the winter on Cape Cod, you know, they're not sitting on a lot of money that they can just go forward, pay all their expenses with little or no income. I mean, even the restaurants who are doing takeout. I mean, you know better than anybody. I mean, what is
There's
that?
no money in takeout.
Yeah, I mean,
For most places.
so it makes it very challenging. I mean, I guess you do takeout to remain open and to have a presence and maybe to keep some of your people employed and you know, all of that. But a lot of the places are still very challenged. I mean, I've heard a few restaurants are doing well with takeout. Some of the restaurants that were more informal dining, let's say. So no simple answers coming from the legal sector here.
So,
You know, the other interesting thing I read today, you know, and again, when you see statistics and facts, you just don't know, but there was some statistic about that majority of Americans that were asked prefer to be closed longer than focusing on opening business. And I thought about that and I was like, yeah, you know, if you're not a business owner, you know, you're not really understanding that perspective and all. So what it made me think about is even if we do all the things right and we get our businesses open, what percentage of people are just not going to go anyway? And that's the great unknown. I mean, we could get open, and if you're open, if the governor said tomorrow, hey, you know, everything's fine, back to normal, are the restaurants, are the retail, are they going to have 100% capacity? I don't know. That's the other big unknown. How many people are actually going to come out and frequent these places? So,
well, that's a really good
that fear factor is very real and it's very large.
No question. Well, we heard at the beginning of the show, right? We put Gary on first every week because he does his homework and we trust him. And one of the things that he said was that, you know, based on all the information he's gathered, he's lagging behind even what's allowed a little bit just to make sure that he and his family stay safe. And so I think, you know, business owners have to really understand that that's a potential reality. So here's the deal, right? For business owners or managers or workers, either we make some form of lemonade out of these lemons or we die of thirst, right? And that's the very real challenge before many of the people on this call today. So, you know, Bill, you're out open for takeout and starting to get ready for maybe a transition to some sort of phased opening with outdoor seating. Elizabeth, as we discussed earlier, you're between phase 1 and phase 2 and getting ready to accommodate more of your clientele, but in a very different way than you ever have before. And Michael, you're dealing with literally hundreds of members, each with different needs and ideas, and also trying to represent them with the town as from a regulatory perspective. The community decides what that phased reopening means. And so every week it seems like we're at a critical juncture, but we certainly are again this week. So I'll throw this out to anyone on the panel today. You know, that's making, I know it's a cliche, but it's really apropos here. So making lemonade out of these lemons is probably the toughest thing any of us have ever done.
Oh, I wanted to make a comment. First, I just want to make sure we get this on the tape that Bill's question. There's been 1,312 cases in Barnstable, total case count, and 115 deaths. Okay, so that's the Barnstable numbers. But I was going to say that I don't think all industries are going to the effect is different by industry. I think you really got to take this apart. It's very nuanced. Restaurants, people could put off going to restaurants for a while, but in my informal survey of my friends, including myself, there came a time when my hair was driving me nuts.
It looks good.
I know. I thought you were going to keep it long all summer, Gary.
Now, just so you don't think I went crazy, my niece happens to cut hair, and she came over to my house with a mask on. I put a mask on, and we cut my hair. So I still am pre-phase, I'm phased back. But still, I think I think you might have a backlog, Elizabeth. You know what I mean? There's going to be like a demand that might be really strong. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, so let me explain just a little bit further as you gentlemen were speaking of this. So that's one of the problems so I can tell you right now to date, since I was closed, which was the third week of March, I have 102 clients that I need to get into the book, and I don't have a date to open yet. Wow. And that is just being specific of one service that I do, which is skincare. Now, I do work with a lot of physicians and whatnot, so a lot of it is pre and post-operative, so they were supposed to have treatments and things done. We can't even get started on a program because I don't even know what the regulations are. So from what I understand, I'm still very limited. Now, I did try and do right from the very beginning. We did a curbside pickup because I do sell a lot of retail. And I have to tell you, that was probably more lucrative for me at that point than it is to open the doors and what I have to do. So because I was able to do that right from the very beginning and stay in touch with my clients, I mean, I did, as you say, I was like the circus act. I did anything that I possibly did. We did education classes for our clients that they could sign up for. I worked with one of our clients who does meditation, so we improvised that, and they were clients of ours and they were doing that on a regular basis. We were just trying to stay in touch because I didn't want to lose that attachment, just like you do, Mr. Zammer, with all of the people that, like Donna and I, we'd be lost without your onion rings on Friday nights.
Oh,
The onion rings.
So
Gary, we got ripped off, Gary.
We didn't get onion rings when we went.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
Sorry.
But those are the types of things that we are having to change. And as you say, making lemons from them, I think my clients have been grateful because I've had to step outside the box. But now that I'm given the opportunity to open, I will be honest and say I am fearful of the financial burden it is going to have on me to step forward without having my clients really 100% on board, because a lot of them are fearful as well. Either they're old or they're immunocompromised, so they just can't come in. And we've already seen that, where there's been at least 40% of those that we've tried to put into the book are opting to wait until, again, so that's another 4 or 5 weeks. And so I'm seeing that already, and that's where it's that balance of, what's the next step and how much more lemonade can I make? I mean, I can only squeeze so much juice out of it.
Right.
But that's would you expect that? I mean, you'd get this backlog of demand, right? I mean, at the point that people do feel comfortable, suddenly it's like boom, right? I have friends in the dental business that can't do dental hygiene right now. I mean, so they're a quarter behind. They're like 3 months behind in dental hygiene, right? I mean, so what's going to be the demand for dental hygiene when they finally can do it? What I'm wondering is, in some business, I mean, sorry, Bill, I could put off going to a restaurant, but
no, you could.
But maybe I can't put off getting my hair cut because I can't stand it, right? So I just think all I'm saying is maybe different industries are going to work differently.
So, Gary, you brought up in the beginning the fact that when they come into town, you've got to be quarantined. So let me lay out this scenario. Maybe Jeff, you can answer it for me. You now come into Falmouth and you rent a nice hotel room, and you're supposed to quarantine yourself for 2 weeks. So you had a couple of days, you had a weekend stay. So how do you quarantine? And then on top of that, I now say, okay, I'm quarantined. Now I got to go to a restaurant to eat because there's nowhere else to get food. So now I've got to go into that restaurant. And again, you violate the quarantine. So Jeff, who enforces all this stuff? I mean, how are they going to tell what's going on? How do you in fact say, the sheriff going to come and stick a gun in your head? What are they going to do?
Well, I mean, on the health stuff, I think it would be someone reporting a violation, to the local board of health.
And what are they going to do to them?
and beyond at the state level. But I think the governor's going to leave a lot of this to the communities to figure out and to also police.
Yeah.
And Michael's going to get stuck with it all.
Oh, please. But like to Elizabeth's point, people lie, right? Oh, I didn't come from out of state. I've already been here 2 weeks. Or, I mean, it's going to be all self-managed. And, to Gary's point, you have to be vigilant, continue wearing your mask. You have to protect yourself.
And I just want to throw this in. I don't think that you can possibly legislate the level of compliance that you want, right? If people are going to wear masks or not, they're going to do the way you get compliance is you actually make it patriotic. You make it a matter of empathy. You make it something people want to do because you lead with that thought. And you explain to people how they can do something for the whole community by doing the right thing. That's the only way you get compliance.
And that's kind of the point of Troy's point about making the lemonade. It's about a community coming together and everybody working toward the mutual goal and the mutual benefit. And the more of that you have, I think the better it is. People are just in a better frame of mind, and people supporting and helping each other. Jeff's point earlier, I've heard several, not just a couple, like many, many stories of landlords, business landlords, who've given their tenants a break. And part of it is because of the generosity, part of it is Machiavellian, because they know, well, I can't rent the space right now anyway, right? So I've got to deal with what I have. But I think there's a lot of that going out there, people holding each other's hands and trying to really figuratively and trying to support each other. And that's what I'm hoping when we're opening, the community is going to come out. I mean, I've seen a lot of people in the community eating takeout. I mean, we're doing
Michael's battery was low. He had let me know, so he will rejoin us in a minute. But to follow on the point that he was making, I have a dear friend who owns a business, and she got home from work one day. She had just reopened in phase 1, and there was an envelope on her door from her landlord. She had been struggling to pay her rent and thought it may be some sort of legal notice, when in fact it was her check for the portion of rent she had paid, and her landlord was giving it back to her. And those are the stories, I think, going back to what we were just talking about. I agree that you can legislate human behavior, but you cannot legislate human emotion. So our success, and our collective success is what I mean, as we phase into some return to an active economy, is dependent upon people believing that what they are doing is for the greater good, right? What Gary talked about, and wearing a mask and being out there and taking precautions. Just about everything I've read says that when I wear a mask, it certainly is to protect me, but actually more so, it's to protect others from me. And so if I feel as though I'm contributing to the greater good by doing that, then we'll be in a better place. And I think that's the challenge, is really, and that seems to be, frankly, where part of the divide is. And somehow, whether or not you wear a mask has become less a public health and more a political question. And that's a real challenge for us. So, Bill, you're ready to look to go from the takeout to maybe some sort of phased opening and outdoor seating, and how challenging has that been for you, and what does that look like?
We've looked at we're okay in the outdoor seating. Indoors is going to be a little bit tough because these plexiglass shields are extremely expensive. I have plenty of room in a place to space out tables. I think you can't look at me. Look at the guy on Main Street. That guy's got a real tough problem. They can only seat, if you take the average place, 40 seats, maybe 50 seats, which is half of their capacity, maybe. Even if you said 50% of their capacity, they've already done that by moving to 6 feet. So it's going to be a very tough time for restaurants. And again, Gary, people are not going to run out and rush into restaurants right now. I know there's fear about that, but the fact of the matter is somehow they've got to get money into the hands of these people who aren't working, who are unemployed. But I'm not sure how they're doing it is correct. And someone will think it through, because they're not going to be able to come back to work and expect to see a lot of business. And I think the restaurateurs are going to finally say, I'm going to stop. There's no sense in being open because they're not making any money. They're going to lose money. because that food goes bad if you're not using it. It's tough to determine what you're using. So it's not just there. I think, I also involved with, a couple of boutiques. And you talk about TJ Maxx is going to be loaded with stuff, to Mike's point, very shortly, because it's all spring, spring fashions that are going. And so I'll tell you that Mashpee Commons has not given rent relief to people, which is unbelievable. Now, those folks are going to move out, but I guess they're hoping that they had the PPP stuff and they're making money that way, but they're hurting over there. Elizabeth, did you apply for PPP, the money?
Did.
You did?
I
Okay.
did.
You're okay getting it?
I did, but of course, with all the stipulations and everything, I don't know that it's that beneficial for me. So.
Yeah, it is tough. It's the rule. There are going to be a lot of Jeff. There are going to be a lot of lawsuits when that's finished, because compliance and forgiveness are going to be two different things. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I'm not an expert on PPP, but I hear that it's very likely it's going to be extended, which could help a lot of small businesses,
Yes.
utilize it over a longer period of time. So that's promising, but it started out sounding very simple, I think, to all of us, small businesses. And it seems that it's gotten more complex since the loans have been made, which is, sort of contra to normal banking practice, where, the borrower knows what the deal is when they sign on for the money. So, but I am not a student of all the requirements. But, if anyone asks me, I tell them that it's probably better to be speaking with their accountant and to go through their accountant to set up a separate account so the money flows through that account, so it's very clear what the money is being used for in the case of payroll, et cetera. Yeah, I think it was quickly done. It certainly has helped, but now we're sort of trying to figure out the aftermath of it, and hopefully it will work out that people will truly end up with interest-free loans.
Bill, that was great that you brought that up, because having spoken to many people, both through the work that we've done on this show and in general, I think there are many people out there who are similarly situated to Elizabeth, who, because of the hope of the Paycheck Protection Program and what it might mean to help a business survive, they access the funds. But as they began to understand the requirements for the forgiveness portion, a lot of businesses have held on to that to see if it really makes sense. And I think that's something we can continue to explore in the coming weeks on this show, because it really is an important factor, because in order to qualify for the forgiveness, you folks know better than many or most that the requirements are fairly stringent.
It was particularly tough on Cape Cod because of the seasonality of our business. Made it doubly hard for us to work on it.
Elizabeth, is that what you're finding as well?
Most definitely. So any of the information that I've gotten, whether I've spoken with both my accountant and the bank that I had gotten it from, and of course they basically are saying that they're just the liaison, so they couldn't really make too many answers, give me answers about it. I'm a preventative maintenance type of a person, so I wanted to kind of set things up right from the very beginning, but it was very confusing because nobody really could give you the guidelines at that point. And I just got an email yesterday, and it's basically saying, this is what we suggest you to do, but we're not certain exactly what it is that we're expecting of you. So just document more instead of less, and have it available, more on the computer as opposed to paper, so that way they can screen it and you would have a better chance of compliance, so that the information is available there. But it doesn't tell you what that is. So it's, it's enough information to, kind of, give you some direction, but not enough direction. So
Elizabeth, are you using it or are you just holding it?
Holding it.
Okay.
I'm
You're
holding
really
it.
being conservative. You're not even using it for payroll.
So, no, so for me right now, because of the way that the phases where they were not certain as to when it was going to move forward, I have a circumstance where some of my girls cannot return back to work because of complications with medical circumstances.
Yeah.
So I knew that before things started, so I couldn't have her even on the property anyway. So some of the circumstances with children and things like that, so that they opted not to for safety purposes.
Right.
But it's all the other responsibilities. So I have it. I was fortunate enough, conservative Kate could call me and wanted to make sure that I was set. So I've kind of left it there without having to use it. But it is a situation now where it's weeks and weeks where I don't have any money.
Well, I think, you may really then benefit from the extension of the PPP.
Right.
If you are in fact going to be opening up, let's say next week or whenever, you hope to open. So it may have been a really good move to be able to keep the money because you'll be able to use it in the next couple months.
Right.
Jeff, I don't pretend to be a expert in the PPP, but I guess I've studied enough. I think, Elizabeth, you might be making a mistake. If even now, without the extension, when did you receive the money?
Like the end of April.
You still have 8 weeks to use it. You
Yep.
got to look at those rules. There's some interesting nuances, those rules, where you can, in fact, be using that money and paying yourself. And even though you can't bring the employers back, as Jeff pointed out earlier, they keep moving the goalposts, but some of the goalposts are coming closer and not farther away. So
Right.
you look at those rules again, because and that's for any business owner now. And Jeff points out the extension that makes it even better to utilize that money. And what they're trying to do. I guess they're trying to get money into the hands of your employees and you to keep you working.
Right.
That's the idea of it. We're using the 75%. So if you can prove that you've used that money for payroll, you're going to be forgiven. And supposedly, I mean, that's how I'm reading. Jeff, I don't know if you're reading differently.
Yeah,
That's the point.
Yeah.
But I
It's to
think
get money
that
in the hands of your employees.
this is an excellent discussion because it highlights the very real questions and challenges that small business people are facing. And those are really questions that no legislator or SBA executive can answer, right? Those questions can really only be answered by each individual small business owner who has to
But
decide.
talk to your bank as well. Your banker, your loan officer, the bank should know a little bit about this.
Absolutely.
The bank is the guy that's going to eventually forgive that loan. And I think they're going to be pretty lenient. But again, if you can utilize it, it's good money. So try. I was afraid of it at first myself until I really start reading into it. And I know other businesses that didn't take it, and now they're kicking themselves in the rear end. But again, it's a little bit of risk to it. But I think the value of getting the money is important.
Mm-hmm.
You still have time since you've taken the money down. You had to originally was 8 weeks.
I put it in its own little spot so that way there, as things, so as we move through. So I have all the documentation, so it kind of.
But you only use it for 8 weeks, remember, unless they extend it.
Yeah.
So you're into the first month already. So you've got 4 more weeks to go.
Right.
But that's the whole point. They don't, we don't really know what in Congress, what that extension is going to be. They're still trying to figure that whole thing out. It could very well be where her situation is such that the clock doesn't start ticking until she starts paying. That could actually be one of the options. So that puts you in a really good position.
That could be, yeah.
That could possibly be one of the things. The other one could be for the seasonal businesses. Well, you don't have to pay, you have more than 8 weeks to use this money. So there's a lot of different scenarios they've been talking about. And I know that all the chambers on the Cape Cod Chamber, the local chambers, we've been feeding all this information to our elected officials. I certainly know Congressman Keating and I know Senator Markey's office have really paid very close attention and heard a lot of this. So, the hope is that in Congress, both branches of Congress are really talking about this and coming up with a lot of different scenarios for extensions as well. And because the whole point of this thing was for employees to have this loan forgiven. That was the whole point. Like Bill, what you said, Bill, pay your employees and pay yourself. So, that was the whole point. So hopefully that's what's
happening. It helps both the employer and the employees. That's what I loved about it. I'm able to pay my employees as well as be able, and keep myself sort of.
Right. But, you know, like we've said before, you know, the SBA that's administering, you know, these loans, you know, they do $50 billion a year, and they were asked to do $350 billion in like 14 days. So obviously there's a lot of growing pains there, but I got to believe that Congress's original intention was for the money to be used for its top best business to help people. So I think they'll rewrite some of those rules for the benefit of small business. They know that the country's backbone is small business. If we don't protect our small business owners, it's all over. And, you know, I think they're going to pay attention to that.
Mike, what are you hearing about, have you gotten any specific information on the periods of extension yet? Are you, you know,
the only thing that we have weekly calls with the Mass Office of Business Development and with the Baker-Polito administration, and in a perfect world, it would be 3 weeks. You know, 3 weeks between phases. So that would be in it, but it's hard to say.
I'm talking about the extension for the
No, the extension. Oh, no.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant the extension. I haven't heard anything specific.
Jeff, I talked to Keating the other day, the end of last week, and the fight right now is the Democrats would like to do the extension with some goodies, and Republicans want to return the limited liability on the co-avoid some sort of protection for the lawsuits. So that's the trade-off they're trying to fight with right now.
I see.
He thinks the extension will take place, but again, you don't know.
I think so too. Well, and then there's other things. So part of the whole thing is like for chambers of commerce, for example. You know, we were not able to take advantage of the PPP. So we're a small business. We've been operating basically without an income. We can't certainly be sending bills out to our members, you know, because they don't have any money. So we're kind of operating very much in the same way. And we're really hopeful this latest rendition that the Congress had put out was going to include 501c6s. And I can tell you, you know, meeting with the Cape Cod Chamber and the other local chambers, you know, sometimes daily, we're all working harder than ever. And, you know, we've got our staff going, and some of the smaller chambers that didn't have the reserves or the abilities, I know chamber executives who are working on unemployment right now. And that's a shame. That's criminal. They're going to work every day trying to help out their businesses, and they've got to collect unemployment because they weren't part of the PPP. So we've made that very loud and clear, too. So there's a lot of things Congress is talking about, Jeff, and that's one of the things. But I'm really hopeful they're going to be able to come through and understand that people need this.
Yeah.
Well, one thing's for sure, as long as these questions linger, we will continue to bring you this show every week to be helpful, because as it shows behind me and behind Bill, Falmouth cares. I have to say this, and we've seen it today, right? There's tremendous uncertainty and unknowns all around us. But one thing of which I am certain, and that is, of the many guests we've had on the show over the last several weeks, Elizabeth Corey has the best background of any of them, with her Falmouth Cares t-shirt. No question about it.
Great.
So we've actually been going for well over an hour, and you know what? We just kept going because I think that was so substantive and helpful and useful today. But we are nearing the end of another really great information-packed show. Before we do draw it to a close, Jeff or Elizabeth, any closing thoughts?
Troy, thank you again for having me on the show. I remain very confident in our community, their ability collectively to come through this.
And I'd like to say the same. It was definitely an honor to participate. I've had the opportunity to watch you weekly, and as I said, the information that comes forward, you gentlemen are doing a fabulous job. And I think as the community does come together, there's so many facets of it that need to be drawn out. And Troy, you're doing an amazing job, because every time, another week, something else comes forward. So thank you for letting me be a part of it. I really appreciate it.
Elizabeth, can I book a beauty appointment? I won't be doing any good, but I'll try.
One of the first ones in.
Get him in line. You know,
It won't work though. I'm sorry.
I think it's great. I think it's very great, Elizabeth, that you defer to our elder statesman as Mr. Zammer. I think that's
Yeah,
very
you're
nice.
getting very old on that one. Let me tell you. It's Bill, by the way, please.
I'm not a mediator like Jeff. I do actually do some labor arbitration work, but I think I can mediate something here. Can we do like a barter, Elizabeth, like skincare for onion rings or something?
There
like
you go. Lifelong. That'd be a lot of onion rings.
Right.
Right. Well, thank you as always to our panel. This has been another amazing show, and we're very grateful to be able to bring this information to owners and workers and patrons of small businesses, which really encompasses most of our community. So, as I mentioned a minute ago, and while the questions linger, we will be here every week to help answer them and talk about them, and every week bring on people that are part of the solution and part of the discussion. So once again, this is Falmouth Cares Business Roundtable, and for my friends and panelists, Gary Vacon, Michael Kasperian, and Mr. Bill Zammer, I'm Mr. Clarkson. Be well and stay safe. We'll see you next week.
The Falmouth bells were tolling, and our hearts sang on. Was it the spell of our town, or an April dawn? Who knows if we shall meet again? But when the morning chimes ring sweet again, I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through. In